All right, welcome folks to the online rerun of our inaugural meeting of the Bay Area Digital Transformation Group. We had a really great discussion back in February, and we thought it would be a good idea to repeat this online for all of you who couldn't make it. And today we're talking about combining robotic process automation and digital process automation technologies. Just an aside, we have a schedule throughout the year that you're welcome to check out on meetup.com, including one later this month on metrics and measurement, which is going to be very, very interesting. So during the session today, we'll do a couple of brief introductions, one from our sponsor and also a little bit about us. There'll be a short presentation to set the stage for the topic, and then we'll have some live demonstrations and some group discussion through our webinar format. Unfortunately, since this is on the web, we won't have the same opportunities for networking that we have in our in-person meetups, but we all hope that those will be able to start up again soon in the somewhat near future, and we'll be able to revive these in-person sessions. So let's go ahead and start with the introductions. And first of all, I would like to hand over quickly to Tim from Axon Ivy, who's the sponsor of our meetup group. Tim?
Thanks, Neil, and welcome everyone. My name is Tim Harris. I'm Director of Sales and Business Development at Axon Ivy, and we are a global player in the digital process automation space and proud to be co-sponsoring this webinar and meetup series with Velocity, our principal partner in the United States. So just briefly to give you a little introduction to ourselves, we are a Swiss-based company, but with offices in the US and around the world. We've been in business for over 25 years, and we have over 2,000 customers around the world, and about 250,000 users. So we're quite well received around the world by customers, been around for a long time. And we focus exclusively on software development in the DPA space. And we rely heavily on a network of partners around the world to help us with implementations, fully trained by us, of course, and certified. And as I mentioned, very proud to count in that group, select group, in Velocity as one of our premier partners in the United States. So that's a little bit about us, and I'll turn it back over to Neil to say a little bit more about Velocity.
Great, yeah, thanks very much, Tim. Velocity loves Axon Ivy too. It's a very strong product in the DPA space. So yeah, a little bit about us. Velocity, we're a very specialist consultancy and system integrator, really focused on these cutting-edge digital transformation technologies. Solutions like Axon Ivy, solutions like UiPath, solutions like Nintex, and so on. And we offer a full suite of services to deliver a complete solution for digitally transforming your processes, everything from process modeling, analysis and improvement, through to actually performing development work and automation work, training, and helping you with reporting and metrics as well. We're working with a lot of companies of all different sizes and a variety of different verticals. And most of our business, funnily enough, comes from the two topics that we're discussing today, which are digital process automation, known as DPA, and robotic process automation, known as RPA. And this is a very hot topic right now. I'm sure part of the reason that you're dialed into this webinar is because you've heard all of the buzz. And what we're seeing in the marketplace is that there's some pretty strong growth forecasted for both these different types of technology. There's a Gartner study out there that says that 72% of organizations that they've been surveying are going to be working with robotic process automation within the next year. And the digital process automation market, which is a little bit more mature, has really been growing like gangbusters, and is a huge market segment right now, about 6 and some change billion size of a market, predicted to rise to 12 billion by 2023, according to the consultancy Think Automation. And while both of those technologies have their own strengths, they're very exciting in their own right. What excites us the most when it comes to real solutions for customers is how you can combine them together to create really powerful, very deep, very thoroughly enabled automation. It's probably worth, though, defining what these terms and classes of software are for those of you that may not be familiar with them. And I'll start with digital process automation, which has primarily and historically been more focused on workflow automation. The way that we think of a DPA solution is really as a digital backbone for your operations, where everything is built and centered around a business process that you map out. So these are really ideal for improving the flow of work in your organization and tracking it, standardizing a process and all the best practices, putting them on rails, making sure the work moves, automating it, providing rules, all of that good stuff. But most DPA platforms today also provide additional capabilities above and beyond that. So for example, this coordination of multiple different information systems that might be stuck in silos today and don't talk to one another, and you have to do swivel chair integration to input information from one system into another system manually. A lot of these DPA platforms will perform orchestration, is the term, where you can move and transform data from one place to another with the DPA being a common user interface on top of that. And then another very powerful feature, which we'll get into a little bit with our metrics discussion, which is again coming up later this month, is the analytics piece, which is a lot of this software provides the capability to create an automated audit trail of every action and every decision that is being made in these automated processes with really fine-grained measurement to do things like manage your workload across your team, to identify bottlenecks and to find process improvements. But that's kind of the DPA space in a nutshell. Now, RPA, robotic process automation, this is more to do with things that are happening on an individual's desktop for the most part, replacing those repetitive tasks that are performed by a single work performer, something that can run the application software in pretty much the same way that a human can, with business rules to make decisions and handle exceptions. And some people are getting very interested in combining machine learning with this so that robots can learn and adapt from the things that they're working on, so that they can take on more and more of these types of complex decisions. But that's RPA in a very high level nutshell. And if we break these two down, looking at a DPA solution, almost all of them have a very similar life cycle or set of capabilities in terms of what they provide to build applications. There's usually the ability to create process maps using a modeling standard like BPMN, or business process modeling notation. The idea is that a business analyst or a process analyst can map out all the key steps in your business process, like this sample one here to the right, can work with stakeholders to find the optimal to-be business process arrangement, the way things should be, building in best practices, building in audit steps, all of that. That gets handed off to someone who imports the process model into some kind of tool or designer that can build the application on top of that. And depending on the type of software that you use, there's some low-code ones that are very wizard-based, and there are some which are more powerful and involve more code. You would have a developer building your software application on top of each one of these steps, using user input forms, web services to call other systems, database calls to read and write data into databases, and so on. And then that application, which is being developed, would be deployed onto a server or an engine, which would run that and provide some kind of unified work portal, unified user interface where people can log in, they can see all of the work that's waiting for them, they can pick up tasks and work on them. You'll see a demonstration of this here in a little bit, of how all that comes together. So an example here, super simplified process where we have setting up an account in a back-end account system, you might have a requester that enters the information. So the DPA could be used to provide an input form with business rules that let you enter information about that person, perform some validations to make sure all the right fields are filled in with the right information. They submit that, and then the DPA would call a web service to perform a background check on that person, maybe based on the information that was provided, and present that to a manager who would get a different form to review, make updates, and then they would click a button and it would update information in a database to store data. Again, there's all kinds of processes that you can build in a solution like this. It's really limited almost by your imagination and your time and your budget, but hopefully that gives you some kind of idea. When it comes to RPA, we borrowed this diagram from UiPath, which is one of the stronger and leading vendors in this segment, and one that we work with. It's a somewhat similar model in that you have a designer tool where someone is designing and building this robot that is going to be executed, and then they can deploy it to some kind of conductor or an orchestrator, which can be used to roll out robots to different people's desktops, to monitor their execution, to schedule their execution. And there's two different types of robot that are important to know about. One is a unattended robot, which runs basically by itself in the background. It performs actions as if it were a human, but there's no human watching it, no human intervention. And then there are attended robots, which are something that runs on the desktop while a user is looking at it, perhaps automating a complex portion of their work, or automating something that they have to watch and potentially intervene. So a question that we get asked a lot is, what's a good candidate for this digital process automation, or what's a good candidate for RPA? And for DPA, the very standard categorization that we tend to use is processes that are copious, risky, or lengthy. In other words, there's lots of processing steps or stakeholders involved to coordinate. There's a long throughput time, which makes tracking challenging, or mistakes could have a legal or contractual impact. And very typically, the kind of things that we see for DPA over and over are approvals processes, like approving expenses and purchase requisitions and loan applications and things of that nature. Employee onboarding, offboarding, that's an incredibly common one that we work on quite a lot. Contracts management, issue resolutions, and help desk. All these are examples of things that are automated using DPA. RPA, it's a little bit newer, but again, we are seeing some interesting cases for this, like we were alluding to before, things that are highly manual and repetitive, very high volume, very predictable and rule-based, and with readable input types are good candidates for RPA, because for the most part, you can build in the rules for the robot to take it over and automate without needing too much human intervention, and you're going to get more value out of it the higher the volume is. So we see a lot of cases where there's data migration and data entry being done by robots. We've seen invoicing processing robots as well, price comparison, where it's maybe going out to a bunch of different websites and collecting data and pulling it into some kind of engine to analyze. Another kind of very common type of use for RPA is what I sometimes joke around and say is duct tape integration, but basically system integration without an API. If you have to move data between one system and another and there isn't an interface, there isn't a published API, a lot of people are using RPA to automate that so that there's not human intervention with that swivel chair automation that I was talking about earlier on. So where DPA and RPA can come together, there are a few different places. Certainly one place that you could bring it together would be to route around failed robots and move tasks to a queue for a human worker, kind of like a safety net, which is this one in the middle. So you imagine you have a robot that runs and it encounters some kind of problem. It's an unattended robot. You could have the DPA system create a notification and a task for someone to go recover that and maybe follow some other remediation steps to complete the work. You can also use, of course, RPA as a way to give more integration options for your DPA, like I mentioned before, the kind of the duct tape integration. If there is no API, like maybe your process needs to go out and gather a bunch of information from different web pages and scrape it and pull it into your process, or if you have an external system with no API that you need to put information into, almost all DPA platforms now offer easy integration with robots to enable those kind of interactions using a wizard, so that you can build a robot right into your DPA process. But I think above and beyond that, what's really very interesting is that DPA can give structure for multiple bots to run. So in other words, rather than having a giant robot that does everything, you could use a DPA process to chain together different robots and human workers into a complete end-to-end process, where maybe the initial step is someone's initiating the workflow and inputting information, a robot automates a task, then automates another task, it has a task to recover, it gathers some data, and then it routes to someone to review the workflow, all the information that's being collected, and move the process forward in a normal way. So hopefully this is giving you a flavor that these technologies are not really, at least in my view, competing with one another. I think they're very strong when you put them together to give you more integration options. Now, you've heard all this in the abstract. What I find, at least, is it's better to see the technology in action to really get a strong sense for what it can do. So I'm going to show a couple of examples here. I'm going to show one just pure RPA back office robot. In this case, it's going to be collecting a bunch of data from an Excel spreadsheet and going and filling it into a web form that maybe doesn't have an API. And then I'm going to show you a combination of RPA and DPA, where we're going to have a robot go through a bunch of documents that have been dropped off as a PDF on a shared drive and create cases in a DPA system to act upon those. So I'm actually going to show you a range of different technologies here as well. The first RPA technology that I'm going to show you is Nintex RPA, which is formerly known as Foxtrot. And Nintex RPA, at least in our view, is pretty strong because it's very simple and easy for users to build their own robots. You use this little target and drag it onto your applications, and then there's a wizard that lets you create a chain of steps here. But what this robot's going to do, I'm just going to talk you through it very quickly, is it's going to create a brand new Excel workbook, and it's going to fill a document with a bunch of dummy data. It actually has an ability to generate dummy first name, last name, social security, and other things. So it's going to generate dummy data for 5 people with a random first name, last name, and SSN inside of this Excel spreadsheet that it creates. It's going to rename that, close the workbook, and save it. It's then going to import that data, and it's going to go through each one of the records in that spreadsheet, and it's going to go fill it in a web form online. And then it's going to give me a nice little message to tell me how many records it processed. All I have to do to run the robot is click this little start guy, and then I can vary the speed with this slider here. So let me go ahead and actually get this robot running here. I'll click the start button. Then we get our Excel file. You can see here, it's looping through here and it's populating all these dummy values. So it's going to do 5 of these. And then it's going to start to kick off the web form in the browser once it saves all the information. So it's opening up my browser, and you can see it's going through, and now it's filling in the information from the Excel spreadsheet and submitting it one record at a time. So while it's running through this, again, you could see you could use an RPA robot to pull information from a structured Excel spreadsheet and go and fill it into web forms or web applications. You could, of course, do it the other way around, where it goes to web applications and extracts the information and puts it into an Excel spreadsheet or into some other data source. But that's a very kind of simple and effective example of a basic robot. And you can see here the nice message, how many records it handled, and how long it took. So there's your basic robot. Now we're going to get onto something a little bit more advanced, the DPA and RPA combination. So I have a DPA system here kind of running in the background. It doesn't really matter so much what the DPA system is that you're using, because most of them, if not all of them today, will support this kind of RPA integration. But in this case, we're going to use Bazaji as a BPM, and then we have UiPath as our RPA. Now, what's interesting about UiPath as compared to Foxtrot, again, just in our opinion, is UiPath is a little bit more sophisticated. You can see here already by looking at it that it's kind of more developer focused, and it's a little bit stronger in creating really complex robots. But as a recap, the DPA, we're going to show an automated purchasing process. And the benefits of this would be for creating purchase requisitions. It has automated forms to streamline the data entry and improve its accuracy. It's going to track the status of the request as it moves from one person to the next with email notifications. There'll be an inbox or to-do list of things that are awaiting action. It's going to have the audit trail and the visibility and all of that stuff. What the RPA will do is feed the purchasing process to eliminate some manual data entry. And our scenario is going to be that there are some new hire forms that are being filled in, where every new hire has to get some certain equipment that's purchased for them. So I'll open up this sample PDF form here. And you'll see we have David F. Hubbard with an address, phone number, an email, birth date, their employee ID, their department, start date, and so on. Kind of basic stuff that you'd expect to find in a new hire form. What the process is going to do is look at their department. It's going to determine what kind of equipment someone from that department needs. So someone from IT might need a more powerful developer laptop, whereas human resources might need something else. So it's automatically going to determine what equipment needs to be purchased and submit that purchase requisition based upon that person's department with all of their information filled in, and it's going to route it to their manager automatically. So let's first take a look at the DPA, and then we'll show you the RPA running. So I'm logged into the system as a requester, and you can see here on the left, you can see the different types of requests that I can start. Right now, it's just a purchase rec, but you can imagine that there could be other types of automated process or automated form that you can select. And in the middle, you can see the status of requests that I've already opened, so I can check on what's happening with the pending ones. So we have a lot of demo system that we've already preloaded into here. You can see there's a bunch of stuff, a couple of pages worth of requests, where it's showing you a nice summary of what the request is. In other words, who's it for, what are the key dates as it progresses through, the amounts. But you can also take a quick look and see exactly where the request is in the process. So here, for example, you can see you're creating the request, then it goes down into an approval process. And if we look at it here, there's multiple levels of approval, but this one is sitting with the assistant GM waiting for action. And we'll go through a few steps of this workflow momentarily, but what I would like to do now is to kick off the RPA. So it's going to look at this directory. You can imagine it's a shared drive where all of these new hire PDFs are being dropped by HR. It's going to read them, and it's going to create a couple of new cases and submit them automatically. So I'll come in here, and I'm just going to run this as an attended robot right now by clicking the run button. But if you remember, we said before you can have these unattended robots that run in the background. It could run, for example, at midnight every night and automatically pick these up without any human intervention. But let's just run this one here. So I'll click run. And all the magic is happening in the background. It's actually reading and parsing the content of the PDFs. And then when it's finished, it's reporting back that there are 2 documents in the folder here. These are the 2 documents that it picked up and read and parsed. So now if I go back to the pending list, you remember there was just an example record right there at the end. What we would expect to see is a couple of records for Arthur Dent and the David F. Hubbard that we were looking at before. And you can see it's busy loading here, but if I refresh this, hopefully it will come up. Okay, great. So here's your Arthur Dent, and here's your David F. Hubbard. And if you were to go and take a look at the actual record, just to see what the robot filled in based on the PDF, you'll see it picked up the name, the date, whether they're an on-site or off-site employee, the department, the approving manager was automatically picked up. And it also created the standard list of equipment for an HR person, the laptop, the mouse, the keyboard and the monitor and the docking station, and created all those purchasing items. Not just that, but it also took a copy of the PDF that was loaded and stored it within the record. So if you're going through the approval process and you want to see, what was the new hire form that originated this request, you could do so by opening it up, and you'll see there's the David F. Hubbard that we had created earlier on. So the only other thing I'll show you just very quickly here in terms of the digital process automation is this idea of the digital form. Many of you will be familiar with this concept already, but let's say, for example, I was going to create a new request. One of the main advantages of a DPA system like Axon Ivy or Bizaji or any of these others is that you can create these very powerful, very rich forms that have data validations and searches and system integrations built in. This increases the accuracy of the requests that are being submitted. It makes it a much faster and more pleasant experience for end users as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So you can see here some basic stuff like required fields are indicated in red with drop-down values. You have the ability to maybe vary your approving managers depending on what department that you select. You can have integrations into external systems of record. So for example, SAP, if that's your ERP, you can search for all the vendors that meet a certain criteria and pull in your vendor information from SAP. You can have basic rules where you can't select a desired delivery date in the past. And if you select one that's too soon, like within a week, it flags it as an urgent request and makes you pick a reason like my boss said so. I'm sure that's more common than we'd like to admit. And things like calculations for all the different request items that you want to fill in. So you can do the quantity times the unit price, and it's going to automatically compute that, create the subtotal at the bottom, factor in the taxes, and so on. Now, of course, you've all seen web forms that do this, but what's interesting about a DPA platform is that you have that very rapid, very fast, very easy way of building and adjusting these forms and dropping them on top of your automated and mapped out business process. So in any case, that's a little bit of a taster of a DPA plus an RPA integration. So some key lessons learned. The first thing that we found working through projects like this is that even if you're working on an RPA project and not a DPA project per se, it's still worthwhile to use process maps to model and optimize the entire process, including the robot workers, just to understand the context of where the robot is in the whole process, to optimize your business process first, and to provide those kinds of recovery options if something goes wrong with the robot. You use DPA to orchestrate multiple robot workers along with human workers and API calls so that you have a more complete solution. Using the DPA to create tasks for human workers when robot fails. And this is a little bit of a controversial one for some folks, but for other folks, it's more common sense. But RPA is great as a system integration tool, as you saw, from moving data from one system to the next, but only partially joking when I call it duct tape integration, in that you can make it very solid, but it's no substitute for a real strong API. So we typically recommend that if you're using a robot It's a great way to get an integration up quickly and to start delivering value immediately, but you would always want to be looking at developing an API at the end of the day to make the data exchange more systematic and more reliable. So that then leads us on to the discussion. Typically in the Meetup forum, we would have kind of a more open, interactive type of discussion. Because we're here on a webinar, we'll have to take some questions over the chat. Tim's been receiving some questions during the chat while we've been talking, and also we'd like to give you the opportunity to put your questions in now. So we'll just give you a couple of seconds here to start putting some questions in. And maybe Tim, if you have any questions already that you want to start with, we can jump into
we have
those.
We have a couple coming in already, Neil. Thanks very much for that. First question is from Brett. Do you recommend that end users create their own robots to automate their own workflow?
Oh, okay, yeah, no, that's an interesting question, because you saw with Foxtrot RPA, it's really designed to make it so that rather than having the IT group or an architect design and build all these robots, it's almost more like a point solution. Like if you're seeing an opportunity to automate some aspect of the work that you're already doing, you could use something like that to automate it yourself. I think in general, those kind of tools are a good idea and they're very valuable. I think though, ultimately, if an organization is serious about an RPA strategy or an RPA plus DPA or digital transformation strategy, it'll be important to keep track of what robots are being built by end users, and to have some kind of facility for improving them, tracking them, deploying them, and rolling them out. Because what ends up typically being a point solution for one person can end up being something very powerful that many other people in the company could use.
Excellent. Thanks, Neil. I think I can field the second question. Second question from Steve: which DPA platforms are compatible with RPA? So speaking from Axon Ivy DPA vendor, I would say that almost all DPA platforms are compatible in some fashion with RPA. Where the distinction is whether the DPA platform also has its own integrated RPA tool that it works with generally, not exclusively, but primarily. And so some DPA platforms have their own RPA tool. Speaking as Axon Ivy, we have a different strategy and a different approach where we've concentrated our development efforts on the DPA platform and have very strong integrations with most of the major RPA vendors, including Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, UiPath, and so forth. So it's really a difference in philosophy whether you're looking for a single vendor that has both, but you know, in terms of having one-stop shopping for both tools, or in the case of Axon Ivy, we think that there are some real advantages to having a best-of-breed platform and using strong integration between the two.
Something tells me you get that question a lot, Tim. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Something tells me you get that question a lot. It sounds like you have a very good prepared answer.
I'm trying to answer it not too salesy of a way, but
yes.
Hopefully I see a difference in philosophy, and we, of course, we think ours is the best approach, but that depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I would be inclined to agree with that. I think in our experience, all the DPA and RPA platforms that we've worked with have some method to integrate together. Most of them offer wizards and connectors so that you can connect, you know, Axon Ivy to Blue Prism, or Bizaji to UiPath, or, you know, Appian to Automation Anywhere, or any combination of those. But it usually makes sense to pick the right platforms for your business need, rather than trying to go for an all-in-one provider that just kind of gives you across the board mediocrity. So yeah, and you saw the contrast between UiPath and the Nintex Foxtrot a little bit, where Nintex Foxtrot was super easy, super fast, kind of more focused on the end user, and UiPath is this much more powerful thing. So you should always be focused on what's the right components for your particular business need. Okay, very good. Any other questions, Tim?
Yeah, actually, question for Barbara. What if a process is not mature enough to automate with DPA or RPA? What do you do?
Yeah, no, that is an interesting one. We get asked that question fairly frequently, and it's kind of similar to the, what process do I choose to start automating first? So I think the best thing is to use modeling tools like BPMN to really understand what business process it is that you're trying to automate and to tease out some of the ambiguities and the business rules in that process. Going through a kind of a baselining, a documentation and analysis phase. And then once you've completed that, you can determine if it's something that should be automated with a robot or with DPA or some combination of both. But also you might be going through the process and realizing that actually it's just not high volume enough or it's not predictable enough to really automate. And maybe there's a different opportunity that you want to chase instead. I think understanding the maturity of a process it's a great question because it's really key in selecting what you're going to tackle most productively with this technology.
Excellent, thanks, Neil. And actually, we only have one more question from Sam. What are some good metrics to measure a DPA or RPA initiative?
Okay. I think probably that one must be coming from, I was talking about the other webinar that's coming up, so I'd really be remiss to not put in a plug for that. We do have a webinar coming up on metrics and measurement for these projects, which I think you'd be very interested in. But I can say just at a very high level, again, what we've seen with these types of projects is your metrics typically fall into one of four main categories when you're doing this type of automation. One is an audit or compliance gain. So it's the kind of gain that's realized with the implementation of the audit trails or standardization of procedures or closure of known audit issues. You can do that with robots and with DPA. So that's one category, the audit. The other one is customer satisfaction gains. And this is where there's improvements in the process that better align it to customer expectations or resolving known customer issues that you've got through customer surveys or net promoter score or things like that. Customer satisfaction is another metric that you can build things around for this automation. Productivity gain and throughput time are kind of the more obvious and typical ones. Productivity gains when you're automating or removing work steps or reducing errors gets you better effective utilization of resources, so doing more with less. Throughput time, of course, when the speed of execution is increased, you're getting rid of delays, you're doing more work in parallel and so on. So again, I think the main metrics, audit compliance, customer satisfaction, productivity, throughput time, you'll typically be able to create indicators around those categories.
Awesome. Well, Neil, I don't think we have any more questions.
Very good. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here on the webinar. Again, many apologies, this wasn't an in-person meetup as originally scheduled, but it looks like this unfortunately will be the new reality for a little while longer. Again, I would highly encourage you to check out meetup.com, our digital transformation Bay Area group. We have a number of meetups still scheduled throughout the year. They're all going to be in this webinar format. They've got some very interesting ones coming up. If you want to check us out, we're on innovelocity.com, and Axon Ivy is also out there as well. So thanks again for your time, everyone, and we hope to see you at a future meetup.
Thank you.